My name is Susan Stone.
Okay.
I'm presenting Module 6, Observing Achievement of Results Using Scales and Matrices. Let's go by learning objectives on page 77 in your grade participant manual. Page 77. Participants learn the process of creating an outcome scale. Understand how outcome scales can be used to measure incremental change, movement towards self-sufficiency. Are able to combine outcome scales to form an outcome matrix to capture multiple interventions, needs, programs, and outcomes. Participants understand the uses of the outcome matrix and can analyze an outcome matrix. Let's turn over to page 78. Introduction to outcome scales. Let's take a look at the scale we have here. What does it look like to you? Does it remind you of anything? Yes, the automobile gas gauge. There's, without having the definition of the above labels, full to empty, we can recognize a continuum ranging from most desirable status full to least desirable status empty. Outcome scales are used to identify and measure incremental change. In this scale, we measure the incremental change in the amount of gas available to power the automobile. Why do you keep your eye on your gas gauge?
Make it to the house.
Yes, because guess what? It changes. And that's the reason why we have to keep our eye on the gas gauge. The outcome scale used in community action is a 5-point continuum of outcomes that describe different states or conditions of status ranging from striving to in crisis. It can be used to identify and access or measure incremental change in families, agencies, and communities. Let's go over to page 79. Scale methodology developed by Monitoring and Assessment Task Force. Then you have someone read the first two paragraphs. Mariah? On page 79.
Tell me the 5-point.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Oh.
Template was developed by the CSBG Monitoring and Assessment Task Force, MATF, in the early 1990s. The MATF provides some example scale, but did not define a benchmark to be adopted by all CAA community action. The MATF believes this to best to have the outcome associated with each benchmark to be developed by the local consensus, which serve to define the term thriving, safe, stable, vigilant, vulnerable, and in crisis.
Okay. This is a scale found in many CAAs and other human service agencies. It was developed by the Monitoring and Assessment Task Force in 1994 and can be found in materials published by the Office of Community Services. It is a 5-point scale ranging from striving to in crisis. So, alongside this scale, we're going to mark the striving. Draw intervention line. Vulnerable. And in crisis. Thus, the terminology of a 5-point scale striving in crisis generally conveys the symbols used in a typical automobile gas gauge. There is a notable difference between the sense of well-being when the gas gauge is full as part, or 1/4 full as part, as compared to when it is half full. 4 full, this is the difference that is indicated in the prevention line. So you see the prevention line, and that's what it would be, prevention. Okay. While all automobiles have some kind of gas gauge indicating a range from full to empty, the meaning of the benchmark on the gauge will vary from car to car. One difference between cars is the size of the gas tank. If full may equal 12 gallons or 25 gallons. Another difference between cars is the rate of use of the gas. So the movement from full to E will differ. If I get 40 miles per gallon, my gauge will change at a slower rate than if I get 8 miles per gallon. The rate of use will also differ depending on the type of driving. Long distance on the interstate, local stop and go in a crowded urban area. These are all variables that need to be considered when identifying the well-being of a fuel situation. When do you stop for gas?
On E.
Before the
But
light.
I do too.
Go around the quarter mile.
Okay, at 3/4 of a tank, probably the only time you would do this is if you are leaving town for a long trip and want to start with a full tank. How about half? Again, there are limited times that you would consider getting gas if you had a half a tank of gas, or maybe a full.
When I have a half a tank, I'm gonna fill it up.
You got some money.
Most people,
No, I get better, I don't hardly get it.
All right.
But I get better
The
mileage
mileage.
with
You do, yeah.
usually there are several
Yeah.
participants who wait until they're near E. I'm one of them. How many wait until the gas alert line raised? I'm kind of that person.
Dirty, you call them.
As the gas is used, you are making decisions about intervention, getting gas. If you wait too long, the intervention will be more costly. Tow truck, etc. If you run out of gas. It's true with other interventions too. If you wait for crisis, it's more costly. And we have customers that do that. They wait until the Alabama Power people truck is pulling up, and then they want to run to community action and want immediate assistance. So we see that all the time. Are your decisions based on circumstances? Let's say you are on the interstate and you see a sign that says, last gas station for 3 miles. Will you stop for gas?
Yes.
Even if you have a half a tank?
Yes, I will.
Probably, but if you are in a city where there is a gas station, every few blocks, you may wait to get closer to E before you stop. Okay, let's move on over to page 80. We're gonna do an activity. We're gonna develop a housing outcome scale. Think about all the various types of housing conditions. Jot down the possibilities here. Okay, consider a range of all housing, both best and worst case scenarios. So that's what we're gonna do now. So I want you to, we're gonna be creating a outcome scale once we get this information. And so I want you to brainstorm right now on a piece of paper. What you think, all the housing elements that we could put on this scale. And I need my scribe to come up. Someone's gonna scribe us today.
Oh,
You got your, that's right. And so I want you all to give you a few minutes. And then she's going to write all your housing.
Recreate my bread.
You're gonna brainstorm about some housing situations,
Good or bad, about.
from good to bad scenarios. Okay, let's start with Lorraine. She can give us a housing situation. Just say, homeowner,
Rent to own.
Valerie.
Mortgage owners.
Okay.
Mortgage.
Say rent to own. Rent to own.
Yeah, she went to, and yours is buying, that's what you're saying. What I said.
Section 8? Oh, I'm out of turn.
Press.
I was saying five.
Okay, that's fine.
You were saying.
Reverend Johnson?
I don't know what we're doing.
We're identifying housing situations. The person could be in transitional housing, they could be homeless, couch potato, it's named different things. Rent to own. Somebody help him. McGatt.
Oh!
Section 8, Section 8.
I said,
Section 8. But,
what's that
Savage.
mean? Homelessness.
Just all the homelessness.
As soon as you say in poverty.
What is that?
House in need of repairs?
Repair? Just put repair, you want house repair?
no, these are housing situations. That means that they're homeless, they're buying a home, they're renting, what type of,
Staying with
non-section 8, well, you know
staying
what?
with a relative.
Living with relatives, okay. Good, that's good.
Yeah.
Section 8. I think the same thing.
What's a hood? Bill say hood,
So what do you
hood housing. You have,
I say utilities, but apparently.
no, not
That would,
utilities.
it would be utilities.
We're talking
and
about
that.
housing.
Housing, that's what I'm saying. But I have to go with section 8 too.
What about roommates?
That's fine, roommate.
Cut down costs.
Well, like women, homeless Penelope House, they all take women.
That would be
That would be
shelter.
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 But you got, but now, men can't go to Penelope House.
Well, no, it's just
Shelter.
shelter, yeah.
All we doing right now is housing situations, okay? Shelter, okay. You think that, do we have enough?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take over here from here, thank you, Carmen. There is a significant difference in placement above and below the prevention line. In a CAA setting, the outcome scale can be used to determine when to intervene. In general, if a person seeking assistance is below the prevention line, an intervention is appropriate. If the person is above the prevention line, an intervention would probably be appropriate if the conditions were stable, but would be less likely to be a person of safe and striving. The prevention line is considered to be the border between being dependent and independent. There are no standard definitions for the 5 benchmarks on the Matters outcome scale. These benchmarks are defined operationally by the outcome or condition that become associated with each benchmark. There are differences like the size of the tank and the rate of the use, which would be defined by the creator of scale. Okay, on this scale we have here, we're gonna flip over, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna post this information here to our scale. We're gonna take this information here and we're gonna post it. Put it right there. Now let's decide on rent to own. Where would you think it would fit on the scale?
It'll be stable.
That'd be safe.
I'll say safe.
I say safe.
You all agree that it would be safe?
I say safe.
Safe.
I say stable.
let's get a show of hand, rent to own, would it be thriving? Safe,
Say safe.
Say something.
stable,
I say safe.
everybody voting? Striving, how many feel is striving?
2, 3, 4.
Safe
I go with
I
safe.
go safe.
and stable, so it looked like it was more safe. Okay, what about buying a home?
Thriving.
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 Yeah.
You all mostly agree that it's striving. What about, section 8?
Stable.
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 I go with stable.
Yeah.
What about, section 8, homelessness?
In Christ.
Crisis. What about, living with a relative?
Yeah, go.
That's homeless, huh? Yeah.
And HUD house,
I saw
Stable.
Stable.
So that's really section 8. Really?
Stable.
Stable.
stable, you all agree stable?
Yeah.
Stable.
Hey,
And
really,
roommate,
hey, really section 8 and, they driving cause they ain't paying nothing.
what about roommate?
Yeah.
Roommate, what about shelter?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we would put our benchmark up here. And our outcomes. And then we do our prevention line. So we have our scale. This is our scale. And I would like to thank you for your participation. You did a great job. Okay, let's continue. Okay, I'm not looking at the book right now. If you need to have the group make a decision, we did that. And you did a terrific job on that also. Creating an outcome scale takes thinking, negotiation, and compromise. All these characteristics should surface when you administer a housing exercise. Also, outcome scales will reflect local norms. For example, public housing in some communities may be well managed, safe and clean, and help create a positive sense of community. Public housing might therefore be placed in stable or safe benchmarks on the housing scale. Public housing in other communities may have high crime, be in disrepair, and may contribute to an unsafe community. Public housing may therefore be placed in a vulnerable or in crisis benchmark on the housing scale. Subsidized housing may be placed in the vulnerable benchmark, since any subsidy may be considered dependent. However, given the complexities of a family situation and the prevailing norms in the community, subsidized housing such as Section 8 might be considered to be stable and safe. In all likelihood, issues similar to the above will be raised during the group session exercise. So, I had a customer to tell me recently that her daughter took her Section 8 voucher from Mobile and moved to Texas. And she said, in Texas, I think it doubled to like $2,000. And she said her daughter was living in a gated community. You would never know that she was under Section 8. And she sent her some pictures of it. So that's why they say that Section 8 may be stable here, but it depends on what state you're in. You
Thriving.
could be
That's
thriving.
what I said.
Okay, so that's something to think about. So it's important to have, we had consensus today, and it's important that when we're doing a scale like this, that we come to a consensus, that everybody agree where we post on our scale. So this is a sample scale, and it's not a correct scale. The scale provided is not the right answer, but only one answer that follows the rules of creating a scale. Some communities would place different states on different benchmarks, depending on the community situation, the Pacific program. So let's look at page 80. We're gonna skip 80. We're gonna, we can go on a day, but 82. We're gonna skip 82 and read 83. The sample housing scale, can you see it on page 83? Okay. I want everyone to take a look at this sample housing versus the one we just prepared over here. You should note that some communities will be placed in different descriptors on different benchmarks depending on that community situation, whether it's urban, rural. Several qualities are being addressed, such as the affordability on page 83, being addressed, choice, safety level, of permanence, and support or subsidy. And look at the top of the page, this is a family scale. Note at the top. It is often helpful to view the top end of the scale as the best case scenario, and the lowest end of the scale as the worst case scenario. So let's go back to page 82. Analysis of a sample housing scale. Let's see. Reverend Johnson, start reading it. Please note.
Please note, this is one example of a housing scale. It is not to be considered the correct scale, as the descriptors contained in the benchmark should be based on local conditions. Factors to consider. Type of outcome scale you create for your community may be different from other communities. In all likelihood, it will take negotiators within the group who will identify the conditions of the outcomes and where to associate them to the scale benchmarks. For example, public housing could be associated in any of the 5 scale benchmarks depending on the location, quality of housing, conditions in the neighborhood, etc. Outcome statements are written to approximate actual conditions, and the placement of conditions on the benchmark must be accepted by all who use the scale.
Bill, can you read the next bullet? Some outcomes.
Some outcome scales include headers associated with each benchmark to help decide where to place outcomes, such as limited choice or dangerous.
Okay, within a benchmark, when there is more than one outcome, you have 2 situations. Either the outcomes can be the same value, such as stable, 6A, 6B, 6C, or different values, such as in crisis. 2, 1A, 1B, 0. Only one outcome is placed in each outcome benchmark unless assigned an individual score. Numbers provide a shortcut to understanding placement on an outcome scale within benchmarks. There is a significant difference in outcome placed in the vulnerable and stable benchmark. Movement from vulnerable to stable is the transition from dependence to independence. In this model, a score of 5 or greater indicates placement above the prevention line. Outcomes above the prevention line are considered achievements of independence. Outcomes below the prevention line are considered conditions of dependency. All the conditions in each of these benchmarks are written in measurable terms and can be considered as outcomes even though they may not be the final outcome expected. Let's turn over to page 84. It is important to establishing placement on a scale. It is important to establish a standardized procedure for placing a client on an outcome scale. Once the benchmark definitions are agreed upon, everyone who uses the scale must use the same definitions for each benchmark. I'm gonna move down to the bottom in the shaded area. It is difficult to accurately measure movement on a scale if the initial placement is faulty. You must have a reliable way to establish the baseline. An assessment compromise of associated statements would be developed for each outcome scale used in the agency. We're moving over to page 85. Sample assessment questions for a placement on a housing scale. Okay, this assessment that we're looking at, this assessment could be used during an initial intake. Let's say the customer just walked in the office, and before you would do anything else, you would sit down with them and go over this scale. The response to this assessment question will tell you where to place a customer on this scale. This assessment should be utilized as a standard tool, or can be utilized as a standard tool at your agency, and would allow staff to be on the same page. We're moving over to page 86. Using outcome scales. Let me have a reader for the first paragraph of Thornton.
Outcome scales have been recognized for many
At the
decades.
third paragraph.
The shaded area?
Yes.
Oh, in community action, outcome scales are used to measure incremental changes between the scale's benchmark, which allows us to document the movement from conditions of dependency to increase of self-sufficiency.
Outcome scales can be used to help visualize the big picture of the situation facing the client at first meetings. Measure change by comparing scale placement at two or more different times, indicating positive or negative change or no change, characterized as neutral and stable. Determine how much progress and time it takes an individual to reach the next scale benchmark. Capture incremental change, interim success, progress toward long-term goals as interim goals are achieved. Identify areas where progress has been made toward achieving long-term goals. Recognize any movement in a positive direction on the outcome scale as movement toward self-sufficiency, even if the movement is in crisis or vulnerable. And support development of a case management plan where the client and worker establish mutual agreement goals for moving towards self-sufficiency. The graphic nature of the outcome scale makes it an effective tool to help visualize progress towards self-sufficiency. So when they say progress has not been made, we should identify that as a neutral change. The customer didn't move up the scale or down the scale. So we're moving over to page 87. Consider the kind of measuring progress and reporting using an outcome scale. Consider the kind of evidence or documentation that would be used to verify client progress. It is the individual benchmark on outcomes on the outcome scale that are the reportable outcomes, not the labels, striving to end crisis. It is not appropriate to report outside the program that the client moved one benchmark on the outcome scale, since movement from one benchmark to another will mean different things for each agency. In the housing example, you would not report that the person moved two benchmarks from in crisis to safe. You would report that the person acquired permanent, safe, and secure non-subsidized housing, a measurable outcome. Many software and electronic data collection systems include scales, and these can be embedded. And so we have that in FastPro. You can print this scale out. Just say you are reporting an outcome, you wouldn't say the customer moved from in crisis to safe. You would say the customer moved from homeless to a rental apartment. So do you all understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't report these. You're gonna be reporting what's happening over here. So we're gonna, on page 88, they have created an outcome scale. And that's just extra practice And also on page 89, that's extra credits. So we're not gonna do those today. We're moving over to page 90, introduction to outcome metrics. I'm gonna move down to the second paragraph. In the human condition, we know well-being or achieving a level of self-sufficiency depends on the congruence of multiple factors that allow us to be functional on a daily basis. Thorne, can you read the paragraph in general?
Okay. In general, we accept the need for families to have a wage earner bringing in sufficient income to make the expenses of the household. We accept that adult members must have sufficient education and our skills to provide for good housing, food, transportation, child care if needed, discriminatory spending, etc. If we are thinking about the outcome scale, we would visualize these factors above the prevention line.
Okay. At its simplest, an outcome matrix is a grouping of outcome scales and arranged side by side. So let's move over to page 91, characteristics of an outcome matrix. By using a common framework, outcome scales combined into an outcome matrix can be aggregated and provide a multi-dimensional look at the agency's work. Aggregation is important because it allows agencies to present data on a number of clients and programs in a uniform and quantifiable manner. Okay, so we have the outcome matrix is to be used. Let me, Thorne, read the first bullet.
Well,
The first bullet under there.
okay. Capture a client's progress, incremental changes across more than one scale program or services and over time. Continue.
No, Steph, let me read the next bullet.
Okay, capture the data by client across all agency programs and services in addition to capturing data by each program or service. This allows for an unduplicated count.
Steph,
Analyze data by both client and program.
Craig,
Identify where the client has strengths above the prevention line and where the client needs improvement below the prevention line.
Sam,
Identify the relationship between different domains of a problem or where outcome scales interrelate.
McGatney,
Provide the background context to explain the agency's actions and strategies.
Reverend Johnson,
Create a framework for reporting.
Preston,
Adjust agency resource allocation to areas where it will be the most efficient and effective, where the problem is, and
Lorraine?
Create a assessment based on the experience of the client relation.
okay, so if you have time, we're not gonna do it. We're gonna go to, our next activity, sample outcome matrix. And we're gonna get into group, it's gonna be pairs, you're gonna pair, so, who's sitting next to you? Val, so it'll be you and Val, Reverend Johnson and Presley, Armin and McGatty, Sally and Craig.
And us three.
Right, that's correct. So,
What are we doing?
we're making a sample, we're gonna learn how to read, that's what we're gonna try to do, we're gonna read this scale we have here on page 93. So, Lorraine, you all will take income, Reverend Johnson and Presley will have employment, Carmen and Craig will have housing,
Me, Sally, and Craig.
Sally and Craig will have housing. Did I give you anything? Who's,
Began in Carmen.
okay. And, Lorraine, that won't cover all of them. And Stephanie and Bev and Thornton will have education. Did we have enough people? The group thought we had income, employment, housing, educational training, and we have transportation and childcare left over. So what we probably just, do those together. Okay, in the outcome matrix presented
So
on
which
the
one
next
we
page.
do?
Education and training.
Listen now.
Oh.
In the outcome matrix presented on the next page, you will find 6 areas which an agency may use to define well-being of a family. The sample shows the placement of a family on the matrix at 3 time periods. So we have February, we have May, and August. The status at the time of placement is highlighted. Other modules of the matrix have been selected different domains, with some matrices having 20 or more scales. In the model developed by the Center for Applied Management Practices, there are 9 domains in which outcome scales are organized. These 9 domains are comparable to CSBG categories. This is a family matrix, and the CSBG categories of linkages is more appropriately found in the agency community matrices, so it is not included in this list. So now what I want you to do, I want you to look at the one that I gave you. I gave you income. Yeah, Valerie and Lorraine gonna work on income. So they need to look at where this family began on this matrix for February. So find the one that you're working with, employment, look where that family began, and you can tell us where they ended. I don't know.
You know, we have education and training, right?
Wait, you feel where they ended?
Where they are, you know, at each month.
I'm gonna let you talk.
Come on, man.
You know,
Let's say in February, he started working on his GED.
We have education and training right here in the grade.
But that's it, we worked on.
Well, we working on getting better. We striving to get
Well, we striving.
better. Okay.
Well, in
It's gonna be in the grade.
Yeah.
in the grade, you see what I'm saying, the last time we went in the grade.
Oh, we was there.
We was there.
so
So in February, he started working on his GED.
Full-time work above. They moved from honorable.
And ours.
So we trying to make
We're trying to
So
move
he
that
was
forward.
stable.
We're trying to move that forward. But now, it's in high school diploma or GED. You know, it's in GED. A GED. You think you got a GED? Down to But he got his GED.
So what happened in
He moved up and got his diploma, don't you think?
It's a high school diploma.
A GED. Okay, well, say high, well, after he got his high school diploma, what did he do?
That's all we do.
Thank you.
you all read the scale.
Yeah, we gonna have it health for.
You're gonna start in February with whatever, which one you all have.
We have
Right here.
education and training.
Okay, so you're gonna look at what he started.
Start in February?
What was going on with them in February?
They didn't do nothing.
Okay, right there. That's what you
I'm
got to
saying.
report on.
So that's it. So this gonna be
Favorite man, I was in one scale. So he got all, he just did it?
That's what he did. They didn't do nothing. And that's what you do.
Okay, he reads
So
like.
you decide on who's gonna report.
He just got his GED.
So which one did you do?
That's considered.
Right.
High
Well, he been striving, let's say he finally got his diploma. He got his diploma. Okay. Oh, it's in February. Not February, he got his GED. No, that ain't right. Well, not, okay, now, but GED though, it's gonna, it's 5 parts. You just don't take one part, it's 5 parts. See, it's
And he didn't know high school diploma or GED, he do nothing.
just a dropout. He was a dropout. He just dropped out.
Okay, so,
And then right here,
this,
reading, writing, basic math skills, absent, zero.
Dropout.
Right.
Oh, we talking about
Post high
you,
school.
you have prepare yours, then you can decide on who's going to be your presenter.
Go ahead.
We had, education and training, oh, so you said, go ahead.
We're gonna start with the income.
Oh.
Yes, you did.
You're gonna be the one. Okay, so let's start with, income,
Let's see income.
and we're gonna let, Valerie's gonna be the presenter.
We're gonna start with income, looking at a family maybe of 4, who started off, and we're looking at February 1st. Their income was a little like between 0 and 49%, which I assume that was poverty. In May, there was some increase, 100% to 125%. Evidently, they got a part-time job. They was vulnerable. Then we come to August, 126% to 175%. Looked like they landed a pretty good job, so they were stable in August.
Okay, and that made them no longer be eligible for CSBG program. Okay, good. Okay, we're gonna move to Presley and Brother Johnson on employment.
Okay. This person started out in part-time employment without benefits in February. Then in May, moved to full-time work with the minimum wages and had, benefits as well.
That's good. So they moved from vulnerable to.
Without benefits, my bad.
Okay.
Okay, but then 6 months from February, became full-time worker, above minimum wages, and also had benefits.
Okay. So they moved from vulnerable to
From
state.
vulnerable to safe. Moving on up.
Housing. Housing.
We kind of started in February in homeless, in crisis. Then 3 months later, in May, they moved with a relative, living with a relative. And that was vulnerable, they were vulnerable. Then in August, they moved to a temporary shelter, which they still were vulnerable. Then at the end of August, they moved to a safe and secure subsidized rental apartment, and they were stable.
Okay, that's good. So the, result of employment and a higher income. Education? Where did customers start in education?
Go ahead.
He did nothing.
Okay, keep going.
It started out with
Okay,
the house
started
of
out,
employment.
you know, reading, writing, basic math skills, absent, nothing. Reading, writing, math skills, present, no high school diploma or GED. Then high school diploma, GED, February the 1st, May the 1st, August 1st. Nothing. post-high school vocational education, non-college, business or technical or vocational training or some college credit, post-secondary degree, master's or doctoral, and post-secondary degree, bachelor's and associate. So he just was at a standstill. Did nothing.
And that happens.
You just need a push, you just need
Motivation.
motivation.
Okay, so there was no change in status.
No.
Okay, transportation, we'll do that one, can we do that one together? Look at it. So you wanna start off telling me where they are in February,
No
You
public
had no
Had
transportation
no
at
car.
all?
and what happened next?
Then in May, you got a little transportation,
In May.
public transportation, like,
A car?
and had a car,
Oh, he went
had,
around,
no car, no regular ride.
Okay.
But then, about 3 months later,
Okay.
yeah. Those transportation
Wheels.
needs were met through public transportation, car, or regular ride. Did right great.
Yeah.
Then,
And then we had
always.
one more, which was, childcare, let's see, can we run through it right quick? Can anyone tell me what's going on at the beginning for childcare?
child enrolled in unregulated, unlicensed childcare
Yeah.
facility.
That was in August.
What happened in February?
Then he was on the waiting list.
They were on a waiting list in
Waiting
February?
Waiting list in
Okay.
February.
Still waiting.
Okay. And what happened next?
Then he was provided.
Got enrolled.
Child got enrolled.
Unlicensed, subsidized
Wow.
childcare.
And what happened next?
He got in, he was all right.
Then when he got in, I guess, but look, child, was not the fastest grade I've ever.
Got all right.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's okay.
all right. So we have some overall assessment. Here are some points to make if the group does not find them. The initial assessment on February 1st indicated that the client was below the prevention line in 5 domains: income, employment, and housing, and transportation, and childcare. The initial assessment on February 1st indicated, and this I guess under education, that the client was moved above the prevention line in some domains. In the final assessment, the client was above the prevention line in all areas. Appropriate case management would first focus on addressing the 5 domains that fell below the prevention line. It would appear that resolving both the transportation and the childcare barriers resulted in the client's ability to move from part-time into full-time work and increase the family income. While you cannot say for certain which outcomes was achieved first, you can say that the combination of outcomes occurred together. So, that's just a few ideas. It would appear that full-time employment for this family resulted in a significant increase in that's in income. It would appear that the client has the skills and knowledge to retain employment with the existing skills level. Enrolling the client in employability activities may not be the appropriate intervention. It would appear that the client has the education necessary for employment and that employment provides a reasonable income. Creating additional interventions for education may not be appropriate at this time. Child care moved the farthest, but that could be due to special circumstances related to employer providing child care or other specific situations that are not identified in the matrix activity. There may be additional findings resulting from group responses. So you all did very good with that. I would like to thank you.
Thank you.
So we're gonna go over our key point summary, module 6, outcome scale matrices. An outcome scale is a continuum that describes different states or conditions of status. Outcome scales are used to measure incremental change. Any movement in a positive direction on the outcome scale is considered movement towards self-sufficiency, even if the movement is from in crisis to vulnerable. There's a significant difference in outcomes placed in the vulnerable and stable benchmark. Movement from vulnerable to stable is the transition from dependence to independence. Only one outcome is placed in each outcome benchmark unless assigned an individual score. By using a common framework, outcome scales can be aggregated to form an outcome matrix. It is the individual benchmark on the outcome scale that are the reportable outcomes. If the benchmark on the outcome scales are written in outcome language, they are reportable. It is not appropriate to report that the client moved up one benchmark on the outcome scale. An outcome matrix is a series of scales arranged side by side. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
You are listening.